Good evening. Hello. Just give it a moment while people are connecting. Hope you had a good week. I wonder what sort of start of the year you've had. Whether it's been a gentle easing in, tentative returning to sort of business as usual after all the disruption of the holiday season, or whether you've launched into it with great energy and drive. I can understand both approaches really, given the way that the last few years have thrown up surprise after surprise. There's a good reason to be cautious. There's also a good reason to go, well, I'm going to get as much done as I can as quickly as possible. And each of us has different approaches and different ways that we do that. Did you make any New Year's resolutions this year? I've never been a big one for New Year's resolutions. I can never think where I should start. But how's it going if you did? I know there's a lot of folk who show up at gyms around the country after the excesses of Christmas, and gyms make a small fortune out of memberships which are bought, and then once the initial enthusiasm has worn off, or quite often once they've made a couple of visits and encountered some of the less friendly gym enthusiasts that are out there, people just give in. How's it going? How's it going? How did you do last year, actually? How were last year's goals? I know now you've made it past the end of the year. Do you look back and reflect, and did you achieve them? And I hope you did. Did you achieve them, and at what cost? Do you think it was worth it? That's a much tougher question, because again, that's a very personal thing, and it changes as time goes by. Our priorities and our desires change. So now we're going to start with what I think of as one of the saddest stories of kind of religious effort, an attempt to achieve something through personal struggle and cunning that there is in probably the whole of Scripture, but certainly in the whole of the Old Testament. And it's the story of Jacob. We're not going to drill down into lots of the detail. Jacob, whose name actually means twister, from the moment he was old enough to understand it, his mother was telling him that he had a right to something. Of course, actually, as the second born son, he didn't have the right to it. But she was convinced it was going to be his, and she misunderstood a promise of God for being something that she had to bring about herself, rather than God saying this is what is going to come about. And so she taught him to sneak and connive, and to be cunning, and to try and manipulate circumstances so he would get the things that she had trained him he was entitled to. And so that is how he lived. And story after story, you see how when people opposed him, his response was to be underhand and sneaky, not to confront it directly, or not to trust God for the thing that he believed he'd been promised. And so by the time we get to the stage where, now married and returning home to the land of promise, he's being chased by his uncle. When Jacob comes to the point where he realizes, well, he's now stuck between his uncle and his brother, and he doesn't know that his brother has no animosity towards him, Jacob turns and he cedes a substantial proportion, well over half of the promise that he has received in terms of his lands, and he just hands it over. He just anything for a peaceful life. And so after scheming, after living with fear and struggle for all of his days, by the time he actually gets to inherit, he's thrown away the majority of the promise that he'd fought so hard to receive. You know, the New Testament, Paul speaks about living in victory over sin. Sin is an odd word because it has obtained so much religious noise we sometimes forget that it's not just about failing to meet God's standards. In the way it's used in the New Testament, the word it's a word that speaks of missing a mark, missing a target, as though you were an archer shooting an arrow, or in wider context than that. But it's this idea of missing a target, and so it's not just missing a target that God sets. When you miss a target that you set, that too is a kind of failure. Jesus talks about letting your yes be yes and your no be no. This idea that when you say something, you should make it so. And so Jesus goes on and says, so you shouldn't swear by things that are immutable, because they aren't going to change what you do. You should just say yes and let it be yes. Your words should absolutely be, if I'm going to do it, I do it. And of course, as human beings, we know that loads of things in life interfere. So the answer to that is to actually promise very little. It's to set very few goals and to do it very, very wisely. It's to count the cost beforehand, make sure that you have the resources and the energy and the wisdom and the time and all of the things that go together before you commit to even start something. But Paul comes up with an alternative, a way to understand how you can live with freedom from this sense of, but I have to do it, to take that burden off you. Romans 6, starting in the middle of verse 13, he says this: as those who are alive from the dead, offer yourselves to God and all the parts of yourself to God as a weapon for righteousness. I love that idea. You know, this idea of focus, this idea of power, this idea of purpose, this idea of being irresistible. Give yourself to God, every part of you, as a weapon for righteousness. Translates as tool. It's something that would be taken on an expedition. So it's not necessarily about attacking. In fact, the rest of the New Testament makes it clear it's not about attacking anybody. But it's about this: put yourself in the hand of God that He might direct you and use you and put His force and power behind the way you move and the way that you interact with the world around you. Verse 14, for sin will not rule over you, because you are not under law, but under grace. Sin won't rule over you. You won't be defeated by the things that make you miss, the things that cause you to fall short, the things that mean that when you attain one goal, it costs you another. You see, I'm convinced that you were created with purpose, extraordinary purpose that's described in Ephesians as immeasurably abundantly above all that you can ask or think, according to the power that is at work within you. I believe that with all my heart, that God is not someone who wants to keep you quiet, sedate, and unremarkable on a shelf somewhere so that you just don't cause too much trouble. But rather, God's desire is that you should shine with all the spectacular wonder of His creative power. You are unique in all of existence. And Paul says, when you put yourself into the hand of God, then the things that make you miss, the things that break you down, the things that divert you from the path, they won't be able to control you anymore, because you won't be under law. See, under law, you are somebody who gets a lot of instructions but has to try and figure out how to work it out yourself. Under law, you're somebody, you shouldn't do that. But then it's down to you as to whether or not. Under law, there is no responsibility other than yours. But under grace, grace is a supply of the character of God, the life of God, the resources of God, the energy and wisdom of God. It's the right thing at the right moment to meet the need. When you put yourself completely in His hand, then you are somebody who is receiving His grace. You know, the one thing that every human struggles with is self-control. It's not always in the same areas. The things that you struggle with, I might not. The things that I struggle with, you might not. We have a bit of a family schism when it comes to what you put on toast. Uh, Both me and our little lad, we are big fans of Vegemite. Vegemite is wonderful. Give either one of us a Vegemite sandwich, and we are just in just happy heaven. It's lovely. Liz, on the other hand, struggles with the smell of it, and she's very sweet. And when she's doing sandwiches for him, she will make him a Vegemite sandwich. If I want one, I'm a big enough and ugly enough to do my own. But what one of us might be tempted by, and the other one isn't. Self control is a problem for every human being, even in things which to others might seem like it takes self control to do them. I remember very many years ago when I was still in sixth form, I used to train with someone, and his just total relentlessness meant he would injure himself before he would stop trying to lift. Often injure himself. Generally, when it was really obvious that it was a bad idea, and we would try and stop him, but all he would do is wait until there was a different session, and the people that knew what had happened weren't around, and then he would go at it again. See, self control doesn't even look the same for everybody, but all of us struggle with it. It's limited, it often fails. Sometimes, no matter how determined you are, you simply can't make it. And so, New Year's resolutions say it's all on me. New Year's resolutions say this is down to how determined I am, how strong I am, how I can set my will on it. This is down to whether or not I'll sacrifice all the other stuff, or I'll push everything else aside, or I think this goal is the only one worth achieving, or these five, or whatever it is that you set yourself. But what Paul says is when you put yourself into the hand of God, when you give yourself to God and say, use me for good things, use me for perfect things, use me for things that don't harm and don't destroy. When you do that, then you're not under a set of rules anymore, but you're under grace. You know, if you've set yourself goals this year, I hope you achieve them. If there are things that you've always wanted to do, then I hope you get a chance to do them. And I hope that they are everything that you hope they would be and more. I don't want to discourage you in that. What I want to say to you is this: in those areas of your life where you never quite make it, or those areas of your life where you don't anymore even know what goals to set. And I can't tell you how many times I've reached the point where I have to say, I don't even know what success looks like. I don't barely know what survival looks like. But when I surrender my authority to God, when I say, okay, Jesus, you're in command now, you have control. And not just of the one or two bits of my life which I don't think are really working, but you have to have control of all of it, because it's all interconnected. It all relates. Where I fail in one part of my life, it's going to impact on other parts. And my focus on trying to succeed in one thing might mean that I neglect something that I don't realize is going to be important. So, God, here I am, and here is everything that I am. And you have good things lined up for me. You have purpose. You have delight. You have things that are going to bring joy to my life. And so, God, this new year, I'm not going to resolve to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to resign from being in control. I'm going to resign from being the one who determines how I spend my time and my energy and my finances and what I do, the goals that I have. I'm going to resign from the authority in those things, and I'm going to give it all to you. And I'm going to say, God, you set the agenda. God, you provide the grace. God, you direct me, focus me, apply your strength to my life like a weapon in your hand. And God, what you accomplish, I'm sure it's going to be good. I'm sure it's going to be joyful. I'm sure it's going to be lasting. I'm sure that at the end of it, I will not be defeated by the things that have always made me miss before. Because if I am in you and in your hand, then I receive your grace. And the things that make me miss won't have control. Only you will. So if you've got some New Year's resolutions, oh, God bless you in them. I hope you achieve them. But if you want real peace and real power, I'd recommend at least one New Year's resignation. God, the control is yours. Now show me what you can do with my life fully surrendered to you. Lord bless you. God willing, we'll see you again next Sunday night. We pray for you. Don't forget you can get in touch with us in the video, the details that appear below this video, sorry. And we're always thrilled to hear the good things that God is doing in your life. We're to pray. Sometimes you know you want prayer, but you don't really want to talk about it. That's okay too. We don't need to know. The God that we serve knows. He knows what you need. He knows where you're at, and He is able to hear our prayer that He blesses. Yes, He hears your cry, but if you want us to agree with you in it, then we'd be thrilled to do that. Anyway, God bless. Have a great week. See you next Sunday.